Pregnant wife visits luxury hotel, catches millionaire husband dining with powerful Congresswoman. Welcome, dear listeners, to a gripping tale of secrets, betrayal, and hidden agendas. Today, we unravel the story of one pregnant woman's shocking discovery at a prestigious luxury hotel. What began as a hopeful visit to surprise her millionaire husband spirals into a life-altering encounter involving a powerful Congresswoman. Strap in as we explore the labyrinth of hidden motives, clandestine meetings, and sudden alliances forming in the quiet corners of a glittering establishment. Each paragraph promises unexpected twists that will keep you guessing until the very end. Prepare to be enthralled as tensions rise and destinies collide in the most unpredictable ways. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Caroline Winfield, 6 months pregnant and battling a mild case of nerves, stepped into the grand foyer of the Ritz-Carlton, a hotel renowned for its impeccable service and famously plush interiors. She was determined not to let her uneasy stomach or the weight in her feet dampen her spirits. After all, this was supposed to be a surprise visit for her husband, Oliver Winfield, a newly minted millionaire. She clutched a small velvet box containing a cherished family heirloom, a sapphire bracelet passed down from her grandmother, and planned to give it to him tonight. The brilliant sparkle would perfectly reflect her gratitude for his tireless work to secure their future. Yet, something felt off the moment she arrived. A sense of disquiet lingered in the pristine air, as though the thick carpets and glistening chandeliers concealed more than just wealthy secrets. The uniformed staff at the reception greeted her with warm smiles, but their eyes flickered with an undercurrent of something hidden. She sensed it, like an instinctive tug, warning her to be cautious. Caroline forced a friendly smile in return, trying to maintain composure. Her heart pounded harder with each step she took across the marble floors, echoing like a relentless drumbeat. She glanced around, her breath catching at the grandeur, golden railings, orchids blooming in polished vases, and soft piano music emanating from the lounge area. This was a far cry from the modest life she had known, and she couldn't help but feel dwarfed by it all. Yet her excitement to surprise Oliver propelled her to press on. Caroline approached the concierge and requested the room number under her husband's name. She expected to be guided to a lavish suite or perhaps a private dining area he had booked in her honor. Yet the concierge paused before leaning forward, lowering his voice in a curious whisper. He directed her to the hotel's exclusive restaurant on the 37th floor, offering only a subtle hint that Mr. Winfield had a private reservation. Confusion rippled through Caroline. Oliver had never mentioned hosting a dinner. He had claimed he would be busy with meetings all evening, but he never specified they would be in such a grand public place. With her heart now fluttering in uneasy anticipation, Caroline made her way toward the gilded elevator doors. Her reflection shimmered across the polished metal as she pressed the illuminated button. Instead of a joyous reunion, she was gripped by a sudden wave of anxiety. Was Oliver meeting someone important for business? Or worse, was he intentionally hiding something? The elevator chimed, and she entered, hugging her coat close around her growing belly. The gentle hum of the ascending lift did nothing to calm her mounting suspicions. In fact, each passing floor only amplified the pounding of her heart. Suddenly, a hush fell over the elevator as two impeccably dressed individuals entered on the 24th floor, exchanging nervous glances. They whispered about something Caroline caught only fragments. Congresswoman, private table, and scandal. The words set her mind reeling. The ride felt interminable, and the moment the door slid open at the 37th floor, Caroline staggered out, bracing herself against the corridor's gleaming walls. A swirl of dread and curiosity propelled her forward. The restaurant exuded exclusivity. Plush carpet absorbed every footstep, and tables were set with delicate, gold-rimmed plates and towering crystal glasses. Soft candlelight cast elegant shadows against the high walls, while a panoramic window revealed the city's glittering skyline. Caroline found it simultaneously mesmerizing and foreboding. She discreetly scanned the space, her gaze skipping from couple to couple, searching for Oliver's familiar face. She nearly jumped when she finally spotted him at a corner table. Her heart fluttered with a surge of relief until she noticed who he was with. Leaning across the table, smiling with an air of practiced confidence, was Congresswoman Harriet Calloway, one of the most influential political figures in the state. Harriet was known for her fierce stance on corporate regulation, yet also whispered to be involved in shadowy backdoor deals. The sight of her husband in such exclusive company raised a storm of questions in Caroline's mind. Oliver had hinted at forging high-level connections lately, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined him dining privately with such a powerful politician. Caroline's plan to sweep in and surprise him with the bracelet dissolved the moment she noticed the intensity of their conversation. There was a hush about them, a cocoon of secrecy. The subtle flick of Harriet's eyes and the equally guarded expression on Oliver's face told Caroline there was more at stake than a mere business meeting. Instinct told her to observe from the sidelines before making her presence known. She found a secluded table across the room and sank into a chair, her pulse racing in her ears. As she watched, Harriet slid a sleek black folder across the table toward Oliver. They exchanged hushed words, Harriet's eyes alight with a mix of triumph and caution. Oliver placed a hand over the folder, pausing to survey the restaurant as though worried about prying eyes. His gaze swept past Caroline, not registering her in the subdued lighting. A silent tension crackled in the air. Caroline felt a pang of guilt for eavesdropping, but her curiosity had become insatiable. She leaned forward in her chair, taking slow, measured breaths to quell her nerves. Just as she caught a snippet of Harriet saying, "No one can know about these funds," a stern waiter materialized at Caroline's side, startling her. He asked if she needed a menu or if she was waiting for someone. Flustered, she nodded hastily, pretending she was waiting on a companion. By the time she turned back to the conversation at the far table, Harriet had already stowed the folder in her bag, and Oliver was raising a glass of champagne. To Caroline's surprise, Harriet pulled out a phone and scrolled through messages, her expression darkening momentarily. Then she forced a poised smile and clinked her glass against Oliver's. Their body language was intense, an odd mix of collusion and caution. Caroline couldn't deny the pang of hurt pulsing beneath her ribs. Was Oliver truly collaborating on something unscrupulous with this influential Congresswoman? Or was she letting her imagination run wild? Her baby kicked, as though sensing Caroline's tension. Uncertainty gnawed at her like a relentless tide. Before she could devise a plan, the restaurant doors swung open, and an unexpected figure strode in, a stern-faced journalist named Tricia Laramie, known for her explosive political exposes on Capitol Hill. Tricia was no mere gossip columnist. She had taken down governors and mayors alike with her deep investigations. As soon as Harriet glimpsed the journalist, a flash of alarm crossed the Congresswoman's face, and Oliver's shoulders tensed. Clearly, they had not expected to be observed by someone quite so sharp. Tricia didn't approach them directly. Instead, she positioned herself at a nearby table, glancing casually in their direction. From the determined set of her jaw, Caroline gathered Tricia was either following a lead or hoping for a scandalous slip-up. The tension between Harriet and Oliver was suddenly palpable. Caroline half expected them to bolt from their seats to avoid scrutiny. However, Harriet simply picked up her glass and took a refined sip of champagne, feigning calm. Oliver, on the other hand, looked visibly rattled. Caroline's thoughts spiraled. If Harriet and Oliver were engaged in something above board, they wouldn't fear a seasoned journalist. But their nervousness told a different story. And now, Tricia's presence added another thorn of danger to an already delicate situation. Caroline had come here intending to surprise her husband with a token of love, but she'd stumbled upon a dramatic standoff involving power, politics, and possibly corruption. Despite her own moral reservations, an undeniable thrill coursed through her. She had to find out more. The waiter returned to Caroline's table with water and a menu. She forced a smile, pretending to flip through the selections, though reading was the last thing on her mind. Her heart was pounding too fiercely. She glanced covertly at Oliver and Harriet again, noticing Harriet's posture tense as she leaned in to speak to Oliver, likely warning him about Tricia's potential interference. Caroline strained to catch any whispered fragments of conversation, but only managed to decipher the word boardroom. Suddenly, Harriet stood, a sharp smile painted on her lips. She placed a discreet envelope next to Oliver's plate, then swept out of the restaurant without so much as a glance in Tricia's direction. Oliver, visibly hesitant, pocketed the envelope and downed the last of his champagne in a single gulp. His hands trembled slightly before he composed himself. Caroline took a breath, bracing for her next move. She had to confront Oliver, but the presence of the journalist made her uneasy. What if this was bigger than she realized? Still, the thought of watching him slip away fueled her determination. She rose, her legs shaking. The baby shifted again, as though protesting the stress. Summoning her courage, she started toward Oliver's table. Just then, a large party entered the restaurant, momentarily blocking her path. By the time she maneuvered through them, Oliver had already exited, leaving Tricia, Laramie staring thoughtfully after him. Caroline hurried out, resolved to find her husband before he vanished into the corridors of the vast hotel. Leaving the restaurant, Caroline scanned the lavish hallway only to catch a glimpse of Oliver stepping into an ornate elevator. Gasping, she rushed forward, but the doors slid shut before she could reach him. Panicked, she jabbed the call button. One of the staff members politely asked if she needed assistance, but Caroline brushed them off with a hurried thanks, heart racing. She had no idea which floor Oliver was heading to, and the hotel's labyrinthine structure seemed more daunting than ever. As she waited for another elevator car, a hand tapped her shoulder. She spun around to see Tricia Laramie. Up close, the journalist's expression was sharp, her eyes glinting with inquisitiveness. "You look like you're following Oliver Winfield," Tricia said, folding her arms. "Care to share why?" Caroline hesitated. She wasn't prepared for an interrogation, especially not by someone who could spin a sensational story in seconds. She managed to stutter. He's my husband." Tricia's eyebrows shot up. "Then, I take it you didn't know about his dinner date with Congresswoman Calloway?" Caroline's silence spoke volumes. There was a flicker of compassion behind Tricia's professional demeanor. "Listen," the journalist said quietly, "I've been tracking Harriet Calloway's activities for months now. She's up to something big. I suspect your husband is a part of it, but I wasn't certain until tonight. I can help you find him if you'll talk to me about what you know." Conflicting emotions churned inside Caroline. She wasn't sure she could trust this woman, yet she had no better lead. With a quick nod, she found herself forming a precarious alliance she never anticipated making. The elevator arrived, and they both stepped inside. Tricia pressed the button for the penthouse floor, an area of the hotel reserved for the richest and most private guests. As the doors closed, Caroline felt the shift of her baby again, an urgent reminder that she had to protect not only her own interests, but the future of her child. The hush of the elevator was deafening. At last, Tricia spoke in a low voice. Harriet Calloway is rumored to be funneling money from a secret offshore account into a new political action committee. I think Oliver might be helping her launder those funds through his companies. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Oliver had built his fortune quickly, perhaps too quickly. She had pushed aside her doubts about the sources of his wealth, accepting his reassurances that everything was legitimate. Now, she feared her blind trust had allowed something underhanded to thrive. A wave of nausea rolled through her, but she steadied herself against the elevator rail. When the elevator chimed at the top floor, the doors slid open to reveal a hushed corridor of plush carpets and elaborate sconces. Tricia motioned for Caroline to follow. They crept forward, their footsteps muffled. At the end of the hallway, two imposing security guards flanked a set of double doors. A discreet sign identified it as the Ambassador Suite. Caroline's pulse hammered. She sensed Oliver was on the other side, possibly with Harriet, or perhaps preparing for another clandestine meeting. She clenched her fist around the velvet box, still determined to deliver the bracelet, but unsure now what it might symbolize, a trinket of love or a desperate plea for honesty. Just as they reached the suite, the doors opened from within. A tall man in a crisp suit strode out, carrying the same black folder. Harriet had slid across the table earlier. His stern face was unfamiliar, but the grim set of his mouth hinted at tension within the room. Tricia grabbed Caroline's arm, pulling them back around a corner to avoid detection. They watched as the man continued down the hallway, disappearing around another bend. Seizing the moment, Tricia inched forward, pressing her ear to the door of the suite. Caroline felt a jolt of nerves. Was it wise to snoop like this? But then again, she needed answers. From within, she could faintly hear Oliver's voice raised in agitation. Harriet's responses were muffled but equally heated. The low rumble of another male voice joined in, possibly the unknown man's associate. Clearly, a confrontation was brewing behind closed doors. A wave of guilt washed over Caroline. She'd never doubted Oliver's loyalty until tonight. Yet, as she stood there, straining to hear the words inside the suite, she recalled the countless late nights he'd spent away from home, the whispered phone calls he'd ended abruptly when she entered the room, and the hush-hush business trips that seemed too vague. Each memory fell into place like puzzle pieces, revealing an unsettling picture. She glanced at Tricia, whose intense concentration was fixed on the door. Caroline knew there was no turning back now. She would learn the truth, no matter how devastating. Fate intervened when one of the guards posted outside the suite stepped in, leaving the door slightly ajar. Perhaps he was checking on the heated argument inside. Whatever the reason, it granted Caroline and Tricia a slender opportunity. They exchanged a look of silent agreement. Carefully, they slipped into the suite's antechamber, unnoticed by the remaining guard who stood stiffly at the far end of the corridor, his gaze turned away. The Ambassador Suite was as grand as one might expect, soaring ceilings, silk wallpaper, and a crystal chandelier that glowed like a beacon of opulence. Voices echoed from an adjoining room, the door partly open. Caroline's stomach churned as she recognized Oliver's unmistakable tone. "Not what we agreed on," he was saying. "I took risks for you, Harriet. This was supposed to be straightforward," Harriet's voice replied, dripping with condescension. "Straightforward? Politics is never straightforward, Oliver. If you're too squeamish for a bit of strategic maneuvering, you shouldn't have gotten involved." Tricia gestured to Caroline, silently urging her to record the conversation. With trembling hands, Caroline fumbled for her phone, unsure if she had the courage to gather evidence against her own husband. But if Oliver was truly entangled in something illegal, she needed the truth on record. She pressed the record button just as the conversation escalated. Another male voice threatened that if Oliver backed out now, the entire operation would crumble, leading to devastating consequences for everyone involved. Suddenly, the guard returned from the adjoining room, and Tricia grabbed Caroline's arm, pulling her behind a large decorative column. The guard's footsteps paused near their hiding spot. Caroline clutched her phone, which was still recording. She prayed it wouldn't vibrate or emit any noise to give them away. After a tense moment, the guard resumed his position by the door, apparently satisfied that no intruders lurked. Caroline's heart hammered in her chest. She felt beads of sweat rolling down her temple. She was torn between wanting to burst into the room and confront Oliver and needing to protect herself and her unborn child from the fallout of a potentially dangerous confrontation. Meanwhile, snippets of conversation drifted through the door, Harriet demanding more hush money, Oliver insisting that the funds were drying up, the unknown man threatening to leak damning information to the press if they failed to comply. A sharp clang erupted from inside the room, as though someone had knocked over a metal cart. A tense pause followed, broken only by Harriet's clipped tones. "Handle this, Oliver, or I will." The gravity in her voice sent a chill down Caroline's spine. She recognized the manipulative power Harriet wielded, not just in politics, but evidently in black market dealings. The entire scene felt surreal. Caroline was living a nightmare in the opulent heart of the Ritz-Carlton, an unsettling irony that contrasted the glittering facade with the dark secrets unfolding within its walls. The door swung open and Harriet stepped out, phone pressed to her ear, barking orders at someone. Caroline froze, feeling her breath seize in her lungs. Harriet's heels clicked on the marble floor, her face a mask of calculated fury. She didn't notice Caroline and Tricia hidden behind the column as she marched into the corridor. Once Harriet disappeared from sight, Tricia turned to Caroline, an urgent determination in her eyes. "We need more concrete proof. If we expose Harriet Calloway too soon, she'll bury the story, and your husband will either deny everything or be used as a scapegoat." Caroline felt tears threatening to spill. "I just want the truth. And if Oliver is guilty, I want him to face the consequences." Her voice quivered as she placed a hand over her belly, worried about the stress this ordeal was causing. Drawing on newfound courage, Caroline inched toward the partially opened door, phone still in hand. She peered inside. Oliver sat at a massive wooden table, head bowed in exhaustion. The unknown man was gone, leaving Oliver alone with a pile of documents. An expensive Mont Blanc pen, a real brand that Oliver treasured, rested beside his hand, symbolizing the double-edged sword of his success. For a moment, Caroline felt a pang of sorrow. She remembered the man she once knew, who had big dreams, but had always been tender, especially when it came to her and their future child. Could this truly be the same man embroiled in blackmail and corruption? Caroline's phone vibrated in her palm, the sudden noise startling her. She quickly muted it, but it was too late. Oliver looked up, eyes darting warily around the suite's entrance. Slowly, Caroline stepped out, her heart pounding. She met Oliver's gaze, which morphed from suspicion to shock, then to a flash of guilt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence weighed like a boulder, fracturing under the burden of unasked questions. Finally, Oliver stood. "Caroline, why, how?" He seemed at a loss. She clutched the small velvet box, tears glistening in her eyes. "I came to surprise you," she whispered. "But it looks like I'm the one who got the bigger shock." Oliver's eyes flicked to the phone in her hand. Realizing she might have been recording, his expression twisted in panic. "Caroline, please, you don't understand." She glared at him, her voice trembling with anger. "Then help me understand, Oliver. Why are you involved with Harriet Calloway? Why are you sneaking around with secret funds?" He tried to approach her, but she stepped back. I got in too deep, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. Harriet offered me a chance to grow my business rapidly. We made some under-the-table arrangements, but it spiraled out of control. The money is dirty, and Harriet is blackmailing me to keep me compliant. He gestured helplessly to the stacks of papers and the suspicious envelopes. If I refuse, she'll destroy my reputation and cut off the lifeline that keeps our company afloat. I never wanted to hurt you or our baby, Caroline. I was desperate. The swirl of conflicting emotions in Caroline's chest threatened to overtake her. She realized Oliver's confession was both a plea for forgiveness and a pitiful admission of guilt. Before she could respond, Tricia stepped forward, revealing herself. Oliver recoiled in alarm. "This is Tricia Laramie," Caroline said, struggling to maintain her composure. "She's a journalist who's been trailing Harriet. She knows everything." Oliver's face paled. In that instant, Harriet reappeared at the doorway. She froze upon seeing Tricia, and her features hardened into a mask of contempt. "So, you thought you could play detective," Harriet sneered. "You have no idea the forces you're dealing with." Tricia held up a small recording device of her own. "I have enough evidence to start a bombshell story, Congresswoman. Care to comment?" Harriet's lips curled in a cold smile. "Evidence? I can crush it in court with one phone call. And your friend Oliver here will take the fall for every transaction. My legal team will make sure the entire fiasco lands on his shoulders. If you care about your husband, Miss Winfield," she said, turning to Caroline, "you'd better convince your journalist friend to back off." Caroline felt her legs weaken. Harriet's ruthless glare carried the weight of 1,000 veiled threats. Meanwhile, Oliver stood there, trembling, the full scope of his entanglement glaringly obvious. Caroline had a choice: cower to Harriet's intimidation or fight back. Her unborn child was already at risk from the stress, but to yield now meant living under the shadow of corruption. Summoning a fortitude she hadn't known she possessed, Caroline looked Harriet straight in the eye and said, "I won't let my husband's mistakes or your manipulations compromise our future any longer." Before Harriet could respond, footsteps thundered in the hallway. The stern-faced journalist from earlier had apparently summoned additional allies. A pair of photographers and a camera operator pushed past the guard, bursting into the suite with bright flashes and pointed questions. Alarmed, Harriet tried to retreat, but Tricia seized the moment to publicly confront her. In the ensuing chaos, Harriet's guard pressed forward, but the cameras were already rolling. Harriet's attempts at composure floundered under the barrage of inquiries. Oliver made one last desperate bid to defend himself, trying to speak over the clamor, but it was too late. Tricia exposed key details of the shady deals. She laid out Harriet's involvement with offshore accounts, the hush money, and Oliver's compliance. To his credit, Oliver didn't deny his role. Instead, he haltingly confessed, explaining how greed and fear had driven him to ally with Harriet, jeopardizing his family in the process. The photographers snapped photo after photo as Harriet lunged for Oliver, hurling insults, threatening him with legal action, but her threats rang hollow in the face of so much revealed evidence. By the time hotel security arrived, Harriet's carefully curated image was in ruins. Journalists clamored for statements, the cameras capturing every moment of her meltdown. Oliver, trembling, slumped in a chair, tears in his eyes. Caroline, equally shaken, stood a short distance away. She gingerly cradled her belly, feeling her baby's restless stirring as if the child itself was protesting the drama. The staff ushered them all out, but the damage was done. Harriet's reign of political intimidation had been exposed, and Oliver's complicity was laid bare for the world to see. Their illusions of grandeur had collapsed beneath the weight of their own deceit. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within hours, videos and articles began circulating online, featuring Harriet's panicked outbursts and Oliver's confessions. Public outcry erupted against the Congresswoman, and an official investigation was launched into her financial dealings. Harriet, stripped of her power, faced the real possibility of criminal charges. Meanwhile, Oliver's company shares plummeted overnight. Banks froze his accounts, and investors fled in droves. He moved out of the plush suite, returning to the modest suburban home he once shared with Caroline. When he walked through the door, Caroline was there, silent. She was exhausted, having spent countless hours giving statements to the authorities and ensuring that she, personally, was not implicated. Oliver tried to explain his actions yet again, pleaded for her understanding, even forgiveness. But Caroline, standing in the dim hallway, clutched her small velvet box. The sapphire bracelet it contained now felt like an artifact from a different life. She met his eyes, tears pooling. "I loved you, Oliver. I still do in some sense. But I don't recognize the person you've become. You put our entire future at risk." Oliver's posture wilted. He apologized until his voice cracked, acknowledging he was prepared to accept the consequences, financial ruin, and possible legal ramifications among them. This was his karmic payback, he realized, for choosing greed and power over honesty and love. In the following weeks, the scandal continued to dominate headlines. Oliver cooperated with investigators, handing over key documents that incriminated Harriet. In exchange, the authorities took a more lenient stance on his involvement. Still, he faced stiff penalties, massive fines, the potential loss of his business license, and an indelible stain on his public image. Harriet, however, faced even harsher retribution, formal charges for money laundering, abuse of power, and conspiracy. Her supporters abandoned her in droves, and the Congressional Ethics Committee launched proceedings to expel her from office. All the while, Caroline focused on her unborn child's well-being. She sought solace in prenatal classes and began leaning on her close friends for emotional support. An unexpected champion emerged in Tricia Laramie. The journalist reached out privately, checking on Caroline's health and assisting with legal resources. It was a gesture Caroline never anticipated. She realized how fate could twist adversaries into allies, all while revealing the power of truth. Amid the turbulence, Caroline took steps to ensure her own future. She discovered to her relief that not all of Oliver's finances were tainted. Some portion of their savings was clean, enough to help her start afresh. Oliver never contested her claim to these assets, understanding it was the least he could do for the mother of his child. The heartbreak remained, but Caroline found a quiet resilience blossoming within her. She was determined to carve out a stable life, with or without Oliver by her side. A month later, in a modest but cozy rented condominium far from the city's limelight, Caroline sat in her living room, rubbing her growing belly. She reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night at the Ritz-Carlton. Once brimming with naive optimism, she was now a woman strengthened by adversity. She found relief in simpler things: afternoon walks, supportive phone calls with friends, and the occasional meeting with her lawyer to finalize the details of her future. Oliver visited occasionally, still racked with remorse. Though Caroline allowed him to attend a few doctor's appointments, she maintained a cautious distance. He was no longer the confident millionaire with unlimited prospects. Instead, he was a man brought low by his own hubris, forced to confront the damage he'd inflicted. Each apology was a solemn promise to reform, but Caroline wasn't sure words alone could mend the gulf that had opened between them. In late summer, Harriet's criminal trial began. Media outlets swarmed the courthouse, capturing images of her stone-faced arrival, her once powerful aura reduced to defensive posturing. Clips from the hidden recordings sealed her fate, demonstrating how she orchestrated illegal funding schemes and threats against co-conspirators who dared to resist. In a twist of poetic justice, Harriet's own arrogance had led her to that damning moment in the hotel suite. Caroline read about each court proceeding with a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. So many lives had been upended, including her own, for the sake of political power and greed. On the day Caroline went into labor, she found herself remarkably calm. She called her best friend, who drove her to the hospital while Oliver, informed by a curt text, raced there from his latest legal meeting. Hours of labor tested Caroline's resolve, but in the end she delivered a healthy baby boy. Overwhelmed with relief and joy, she held her newborn in her arms, tears streaming down her face. In that precious moment, the swirl of scandals, heartbreak, and betrayals felt momentarily distant. Oliver entered the room, hesitant. He gazed at the tiny infant swaddled against Caroline's chest. His eyes glistened with awe and sorrow. Leaning in, he whispered, "I'm so sorry." Caroline could only nod, her emotions too raw for words. She allowed him a brief moment with his son, yet the conversation that followed was tinted with the reality they couldn't escape. Oliver had lost nearly everything, but still vowed to provide for their child in whatever manner he could. Caroline, newly redefined by motherhood, found herself reflecting on the nature of forgiveness and trust. She wasn't ready to forget the past, but she clung to a sliver of hope for her baby's sake. As time pressed on, the scandal eventually cooled in public discourse, replaced by the next wave of political controversies. Harriet received her sentence several years in federal prison and left office in disgrace. Oliver settled with prosecutors, accepting charges of aiding and abetting financial fraud. While spared prison time due to his cooperation, he was given probation and a colossal fine that effectively wiped out most of his wealth. Caroline, however, experienced her own transformation. She decided not to finalize a divorce immediately, but insisted Oliver undergo counseling and financial transparency. With a newborn to care for, she prioritized her child's stability above all else. She also carved out a new life path, using her share of the remaining clean funds to invest in a small boutique business she'd always dreamed of starting. Surrounded by supportive friends, mentors, and her unwavering determination, Caroline found a fresh sense of purpose. Though the memory of that night at the Ritz-Carlton still lingered, Oliver dining with the powerful Congresswoman, the infiltration by Tricia Laramie, and the subsequent downfall of an empire built on deceit, Caroline chose to see it as a crucible. The karmic retribution had been swift and justified, but from the ashes she discovered a strength she never knew she had. And as she gently rocked her son to sleep each night, she silently vowed never to let darkness overshadow their future again. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of ambition, corruption, and redemption. The twists and turns of Caroline's journey remind us that even the grandest facades can mask devastating secrets. Betrayal may strike in unexpected places, but truth and courage can topple the most formidable powers. If you found yourself enthralled by these events, by the shocking encounters at the Ritz-Carlton, the relentless pursuit of the truth by a determined journalist, and the ultimate price of unchecked greed, please remember to give this video a big thumbs up. Share it with friends who crave a gripping tale, and don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories. Until next time.